Have you ever looked at your daughter and without saying a word felt that she was experiencing everything you feared most for her? Perhaps you have strived to create a better path for her, to offer her what you didn't have, to spare her the pain that marked your own journey. Yet something inside you whispers, "She's repeating my story." This feeling, so intimate and often silent, is more common than you might think. And it has nothing to do with failure or guilt. It has to do with something much deeper, the workings of our unconscious mind. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, said that what remains unprocessed in our inner world does not disappear. It manifests itself, shifts, repeats itself, and often it is transferred, not in a magical or mystical way, but through gestures, reactions, emotions, absences. Thus, a daughter can learn from what her mother has kept silent. She can repeat what her mother tried to hide. She can carry within herself the unlived desires and unsymbolized pains of the woman who gave her life. This is not about accusing. This video is not a judgment of mothers. It is, above all, an attempt to understand, to make room for a generous view of what unites and separates mothers and daughters: love, pain, expectation, and history. The daughter who seems distant, rebellious, or too different may just be trying to build her identity, or paradoxically, she may be consumed by an invisible loyalty to her mother, because the emotional loyalty between mother and daughter is not always clear. Sometimes it presents itself as repetition, sometimes as distancing. In both cases, there is a bond trying to survive, even if in the worst possible way. Freud said that the unconscious is timeless, and that, without realizing it, we perpetuate unresolved patterns, especially within the family unit. That is why so many mothers are surprised to see that their daughters, even in different contexts, experience such similar dilemmas. It is as if the past insists on remaining alive, even with new names, new faces, new times. The good news is that this can be transformed. With awareness, it is possible to break cycles. With love, it is possible to rename pain. With listening, it is possible to create new narratives in which mother and daughter no longer need to be prisoners of what was. Throughout this video, we will explore some deep and unconscious reflections that often manifest themselves in the relationship between mothers and daughters. We will talk about identification, repetition, guilt, projections, inherited traumas, and the power of mutual freedom. All of this will be explored through the lens of psychoanalysis, but with one essential caveat: looking at each woman's story with empathy without judgment. If at any point you see yourself in these words, remember, this does not mean you have failed. It means you are human, and that, like every woman, you have the right and the power to reframe your story with those you love most. Because what was not possible in the past may become possible now. And when a mother chooses to understand, she not only transforms her daughter's life, she transforms her own. And that in itself is a new beginning. From the first months of life, the mother figure is the child's first great emotional mirror. For Freud, it is the mother who introduces the baby to the world of affection, language, and existence. Her gaze, the tone of her voice, her gestures, everything is captured and incorporated by her daughter as a reference. This identification is healthy at first. It builds the foundation of personality and self-esteem. The girl learns what it means to be a woman, what it means to be loved, what it means to be accepted, from the way she is welcomed and also from the way she sees her mother position herself in the world. But over time, this identification can become a maze, and what was once a bridge of affection silently turns into a psychological prison. The daughter stops living as an individual and starts acting as a reflection, not because she doesn't want to, but because of love. An unspoken love, a love shaped by absences, silences, invisible loyalty. It is common to hear mothers say, "She is just like me." And this is said with affection, with pride. But often this "just like" also carries the pain that the mother has not processed. The fear of rejection, the feeling of not being enough, the exhaustion of giving without receiving anything in return. The daughter, without knowing it, absorbs this as if it were her own. And she begins to live experiences that she did not consciously choose, but with emotional fidelity. Freud studied the phenomenon of identification intensely. He understood that the subject, in the formation of their self, internalizes parts, serve the other as a way of constructing their identity. This is natural. However, when the mother figure occupies a very dominant place, whether due to the absence of a third party to organize the psychic space, such as the father, or due to an excessively symbiotic connection, the daughter ceases to differentiate herself and begins to exist as a continuation of her mother. It is at this point that the daughter's identity begins to fade. She may choose the same type of partner, even if that type causes her suffering. She may pursue a career she never wanted, just because her mother dreamed of it. She may reject her own desires because she feels that fulfilling them would be a kind of betrayal. This does not happen consciously. No one says to herself, "I'm going to annihilate myself to please my mother." It happens inside, in the unconscious, in the space where the most primitive emotions reside, and the mother, in turn, doesn't do it out of malice either. Often she doesn't even realize it. She's just trying to give her daughter what she didn't have. But by doing so without working through her own frustrations, she projects onto her daughter's body the continuation of a story she wanted to rewrite. The daughter becomes a mirror, but a mirror that reflects old pains. And this can cause a lot of confusion. After all, she may seem happy, she may be successful, have a family, stability, but inside something is missing, a constant feeling of inadequacy, a sadness that has no name, a tiredness that does not come from today, but from generations. The hardest thing is to break this cycle without guilt, because the daughter feels that by distancing herself from this reflection, she is rejecting her mother. And the mother, seeing her daughter seek her own path, may feel this as abandonment. That is why psychoanalysis proposes the path of symbolization, of giving a name to what has been experienced, of allowing mother and daughter to see each other as two distinct women, with their own stories, their own desires, their own limits. When this happens, the daughter can stop being a mirror and become a subject, and the mother can stop projecting and finally see her daughter as she is, not as she would like her to be. This transition is painful, but liberating. It is when love leaves repetition and enters recognition, when both can exist without fear of losing each other, when history no longer needs to be a mirror, it can be a bridge. The daughter who allows herself to be different is not rejecting her mother, she is honoring her own life. And the mother who accepts this gives the greatest gift possible, permission for her daughter to live authentically. This is the love that heals, the love that liberates. If you like reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Have you ever found yourself saying, "I don't want my daughter to go through what I went through"? And yet have you noticed that in some way she is reliving the same dilemmas, making similar choices, facing similar pains? In Freudian psychoanalysis, this is no coincidence. Freud called this phenomenon the compulsion to repeat. He observed that human beings tend to repeat patterns, even those that cause suffering, and they do so not out of masochism or ignorance, but because the unconscious is trying to deal with something that was not resolved in the past. This repetition is like a psychic echo. What was not resolved by the mother finds a new space to manifest itself in the daughter, not because the daughter wants it, but because the bond between the two carries deep, often silent, content that is passed down from generation to generation. When we talk about repetition, we are not just referring to identical behaviors. It can express itself symbolically. The daughter becomes involved in emotional relationships where she feels devalued, just as her mother felt in her marriage, or she feels she needs to constantly prove her worth, just as her mother had to fight for recognition throughout her life. Sometimes this repetition is so subtle that it is only noticed over time. The daughter begins to react to the world with the same rigidity, the same fears, the same defenses she saw in her mother, even if, rationally, she wants to live a completely different life. Freud said that the unconscious is unaware of chronological time. It does not distinguish between what happened decades ago and what still pulsates in the emotional memory. Therefore, everything that has been repressed returns, and often it returns disguised as a personal choice. But these choices are not really free. They are shaped by expectations, invisible loyalties, and inherited pain. The daughter may think she is deciding for herself, when in fact she is trying to repair, complete, or save her mother, even without realizing it. This is one of the great challenges of motherhood, realizing that your own history, if not understood, can repeat itself in your daughter. Not because of guilt, but because of your psychological makeup. That is why repetition is not a punishment, it is a sign. It is the unconscious trying to say that something needs to be looked at, understood, symbolized. Until that happens, the past remains present, living inside the daughter as if it were still current. Some mothers ask themselves, "Where did I go wrong?" But that is not the most useful question. Perhaps the most transformative question is, what part of my history is my daughter trying to carry even without knowing it? This question opens a path to listening to one's own story, reviewing choices, realizing what has been lived in silence. This internal movement of the mother has a profound impact on her daughter, even if no words are spoken. Psychoanalysis does not believe in change through conscious willpower. It relies on internal elaboration. When the mother begins to reframe what she has experienced, this content no longer pressures her daughter to repeat it. Emotional freedom arises precisely there when what was repetition becomes consciousness. And the most interesting thing is that when the daughter stops repeating her mother's story, it does not mean rejection. Quite the contrary. It is a gesture of deep love. It is as if she were saying, "I see you, I recognize your pain, but I need to live my life." And the mother, in turn, by allowing this symbolic distancing, is offering a rare gift, the chance for her daughter to exist for herself, with her own choices, limits, and desires. This does not weaken the bond. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Because true love does not require repetition, it allows for difference, it welcomes uniqueness, and it is in this acceptance that mother and daughter finally become free to love without weight, without guilt, and without mirrors. Repetition only has power as long as it remains unconscious. When it is given a name, it loses its power, and what was once an inevitable destiny becomes the possibility of a new life. The relationship between mother and daughter never happens in a vacuum. It is always crossed by other figures, especially that of the father. Even when absent, the father is present, in the silence, in the absence, in what was never said. Freud devoted much of his work to the Oedipus complex, an essential moment in psychological development when children must deal with the discovery of love, rivalry, separation, and desire. For girls, this moment marks not only their relationship with their father, but also redefines their mother's place in their lives. When this symbolic triangle is disrupted, a relationship of symbiosis or unresolved rivalry develops between mother and daughter. The emotional or physical absence of the father can intensify this bond, making it dense, suffocating, and difficult to transform. Without a third party to organize this psychic space, mother and daughter become glued to each other, with no room for individuality. The daughter may then feel that she needs to protect her mother from the loneliness, abandonment, or sadness she has witnessed. She takes on a role that does not belong to her, even in childhood, that of her mother's emotional partner. It is not uncommon for this daughter to grow up with a sense of emotional responsibility for her mother's well-being. It is as if she has been called upon to fill a void she does not understand. This role reversal leaves deep scars. As she grows up, the daughter may have difficulty forming her own romantic relationships. She may feel guilty for distancing herself from her mother, for choosing a different life, for seeking freedom. Every step she takes toward autonomy is experienced as a threat to her mother's emotional stability. And this prevents her from moving forward. Freud explained that the paternal role is not only biological or social, it is symbolic. It represents the law, limits, separation. It is what allows the daughter to differentiate herself from her mother, to cut the invisible cord and recognize herself as a unique individual. Without this role, the daughter remains fused to the maternal image, unable to say I clearly. This absence of the father can manifest itself in different ways. It can be a physically absent father, but it can also be a man who is present, at home but emotionally distant, absent, indifferent. In such cases, his silence weighs heavily. His passivity reinforces the fusion between mother and daughter, as there is no one to symbolically intervene in this bond. There are also situations in which the father is present, but fuels a rivalry between mother and daughter. He excessively praises his daughter, belittles the mother, creates an imbalance that confuses roles and weakens the mother as an authority figure. This also creates a psychological divide. The daughter does not know whether she loves or competes with her mother, whether she follows or opposes her. All of these configurations leave marks that last a lifetime. Many adult women, when looking at their emotional relationships, realize that they are still stuck in patterns that were born in this original triangle. They either avoid relationships for fear of distancing themselves from their mothers, or experience internal conflicts when they become mothers themselves, repeating the symbiosis they know so well. It is important to note that this triangle does not have to be perfect to function. No family is ideal, but when the symbolic roles are minimally organized, when there is space for the daughter to differentiate herself from her mother and recognize her father as a symbolic mediator, emotional development occurs more smoothly. The good news is that even when this triangle has failed in the past, it can be redefined. Awareness brings the possibility of change. The daughter can understand that she does not have to carry her mother's pain. And the mother, in turn, can recognize that love is not about control, but about trust. By seeing this invisible triangle, we open up the chance to rebuild bonds with more balance. It is not about erasing the past, but about giving it new meaning. It is about stopping repeating old roles and starting to write new ways of being, loving, and existing. When mother and daughter understand that there is space between them and that this space is not absence but freedom, the relationship is transformed, and what was once fusion, pain, or confusion can finally become acceptance, maturity, and mutual respect. Few human experiences are as marked by ambivalence as motherhood. There is deep love, but also exhaustion. There is devotion, but also frustration. And between these polarities, many mothers silently carry something difficult to name: guilt. Freud understood guilt as a central emotion in psychic life. For him, the superego, the moral conscience, arises from the internalization of parental figures. When a mother, for whatever reason, feels she has failed her daughter, that feeling turns into an internal judgment that can last for decades. This guilt, however, is rarely expressed in words. It manifests itself in subtle ways, in excessive concern, in the desire to control, in the difficulty in allowing the daughter to make mistakes, choose, or move away. Behind the exaggerated zeal, there is an unconscious attempt to compensate for what was not possible, and often to prevent the daughter from suffering what the mother suffered. But this attempt at protection, although well-intentioned, can be suffocating. The daughter feels that her emotional freedom is limited, that her decisions are constantly being evaluated, and that her autonomy needs to be justified, as if living for herself were a threat to her mother's love. This is where silence comes in, a heavy silence laden with unspoken meanings. The mother does not talk about her guilt, and the daughter does not know how to express her need for space without hurting her. They love each other, but they cannot hear each other clearly, and the affection that should bring them closer begins to create distance. Many mothers, especially those who grew up in environments where emotions were not expressed, believe that silence is a way of protecting, that hiding their pain is a way of preserving their daughter. But in psychoanalysis, we learn that what is not said is transmitted in other ways, through tone of voice, attitudes, and looks. The daughter feels it, and without understanding where this weight comes from, she carries it as if it were her own. She takes on responsibilities that do not belong to her. She tries to be perfect, to live up to expectations, to not make mistakes, and so she repeats the same cycle: love that turns into obligation, a bond that becomes confused with duty. Freud said that where there is repression, there are symptoms, and one of the most common symptoms of this dynamic is the daughter's difficulty in feeling free. Free to disagree, to take a stand, to choose different paths without fear of disappointing. The mother's desire to do right is legitimate, but it needs to be accompanied by listening, flexibility, and recognition of human limitations. No mother is perfect, and no daughter needs perfection. She needs a genuine presence with mistakes, successes, regrets, and shared lessons. When a mother can say, "I did the best I could, but I also made mistakes," she is not losing authority. She is gaining humanity. She is showing her daughter that she does not have to carry the burden of perfection, that it is possible to make mistakes and still be worthy of love. And when the daughter realizes this, something inside her is relieved. She understands that she doesn't have to live up to an idealized image, that she can be who she is, with her doubts, her fears, her limitations, and that this doesn't distance her from her mother. It brings her closer, in a more authentic and mature way. The path to transforming guilt into care is through words. It's through honest dialogue. It's through a willingness to look at the past not with judgment, but with a desire to understand. The mother who seeks to understand her own history not only frees herself from guilt, but offers her daughter a new starting point. She shows that life does not have to be determined by rigid standards, that it is possible to start over, change, grow. And the daughter who feels heard learns to trust. To trust herself, the relationship, and the possibility of building healthier bonds with future generations. In place of guilt, emotional responsibility is born. In place of silence, listening emerges. And in her desire to do the right thing, the mother finds something even more powerful, the ability to love truly, without demanding absolute reciprocity, but welcoming what her daughter has to offer, including her differences. There are pains that have no name, that have never been spoken aloud, but they remain alive, silent, crossing generations like an invisible chain, and often those who carry them do not know where they come from. Freud was one of the first to suggest that the unconscious holds not only the repressed contents of individual life, but also the traces of the family, social, and cultural experiences that have shaped us. He did not yet use the term intergenerational transmission, but his ideas paved the way for the understanding that the past of parents, and especially mothers, inhabits the inner world of their children in profound and lasting ways. A.E. Daughter does not need to hear her mother's entire story to be affected by it. It is not necessary for someone to say, "This happened to me." Silence, a distant gaze, tension in gestures, the repetition of certain fears are enough. The child's unconscious captures everything that has not been symbolized and carries it as if it were its own. A mother who grew up in an emotionally deprived environment may have learned not to trust others. She may have developed an attitude of extreme self-sufficiency, harshness, and control, and without realizing it, she passes this way of protecting herself onto her daughter. Not with words, but with examples, with rigidity in her affections, with difficulty in showing vulnerability. The daughter, in turn, grows up learning to defend herself from the world, not to trust, not to give herself away, and often, without understanding why, she feels a persistent sadness, a difficulty in forming true intimacy, a fear of failure that seems to have no origin. These feelings, although experienced by the daughter, often belong to the mother's history, or the grandmother's, or women even further back in time but whose experiences have left lasting marks. Freud claimed that what is not remembered returns repeatedly. This return can come as a symptom, as an emotional block, as a repetition of painful patterns. When a mother does not process what she has experienced, her daughter tends to feel in her body and in her choices what has remained trapped in her mother's unconscious. This is not about guilt. It is not the mother who consciously chooses this transmission. On the contrary, she herself was often the victim of a story that repeated itself even before she was born. Every woman carries with her not only her own biography, but also the emotional history of all the women who came before her. That is why in many families we see patterns that repeat themselves in an almost ritualistic way. Women who marry too early, who abandon their dreams, who accept abusive relationships, who raise their children alone, who blame themselves for everything. It is as if there were an invisible script being followed, generation after generation. These scripts are not curses. They are requests for recognition. With each new generation, the family unconscious tries to find someone who can name the pain, who can symbolize what has been trapped. And that person is often the daughter. The daughter feels that something is wrong, that life is too heavy, that there is a sadness she does not understand. And when she begins to investigate her emotions, she discovers that part of this suffering is not hers. It is inherited, and it can only be healed if it is brought to light. This process of awareness is what Freud called elaboration. By naming what was once just a vague feeling, it is possible to transform it. The pain loses its power to repeat itself blindly. It gains shape, meaning context, and that opens up space for change. The mother who recognizes her own wounds prevents them from becoming her daughter's burden, and the daughter who understands this dynamic can free herself from guilt, realizing that not everything she feels belongs to her, that there are pains that do not need to be carried, only understood and returned to where they came from. When this process happens, something new is born in the family. What was once repetition becomes awareness. What was once a burden becomes a legacy of women who finally chose to stop bleeding in silence, because it is not enough to love, it is also necessary to heal. And that healing begins when a woman decides that the past will no longer be the author of the future. Not for her nor for her daughter. Every mother wants the best for her daughter. This desire is sincere, deep, often unconditional, but there is a delicate point where love can cross the line of freedom and become projection. And it is precisely at this point that many relationships between mothers and daughters begin to become difficult, even without anyone understanding exactly why. Freud observed that parents, and especially mothers, tend to invest part of their unfulfilled desires in their children. He called this secondary narcissism. The idea is simple but powerful. The child comes to represent, for the parents, a symbolic chance to achieve what was not possible in their own lives. The child becomes the bearer of interrupted dreams. The daughter becomes the continuation of the projects left behind. This is not done with bad intentions, quite the contrary. The phrase that often accompanies this movement is, "I just want her to be happy," but what is often implied is, "I just want her to be happy the way I believe happiness should be." When a mother projects her unfulfilled desires onto her daughter, she creates an invisible and often narrow path. The daughter, seeking approval, tries to follow that path. She chooses the profession her mother would have chosen. She accepts patterns of behavior that please her. She refuses experiences that could put her in conflict with her mother's model. But over time, this adaptation begins to take its toll. The daughter feels that she is living a life that is not exactly hers. She experiences a void that is difficult to explain. There is a silent discomfort, a persistent restlessness, as if she always owes something. It is the feeling that no matter how much she does, it will never be enough. This feeling is common when love has been confused with expectation. The daughter feels she needs to live up to an image rather than being who she is. Spontaneity disappears. In its place arises an obligation to perform, not out of desire but out of loyalty. The mother, in turn, may not realize the effect of these projections. She may interpret any distance from her daughter as ingratitude or rebellion. When the daughter chooses a different path, a lifestyle, a partner, a profession, the mother feels as if she is being rejected. And this hurts deeply, not because the daughter has done anything wrong, but because, unconsciously, she is breaking an ideal. The rupture of an ideal is always painful. Freud spoke of the difficulty the ego has in accepting the loss of an idealized image. When this image is projected onto another, as in the case of a daughter, the pain of the rupture can be accompanied by resentment, sadness, and emotional confusion. But this rupture is necessary, not as rebellion, but as maturation. In order for the daughter to exist for herself, she needs to be allowed to frustrate expectations. She needs to be free to say no without fear of losing her mother's love. And the mother, in recognizing this movement, can transform the pain of frustration into acceptance. She can understand that loving is not controlling, but welcoming. It is not projecting, but allowing. It is not molding, but observing with curiosity the woman her daughter is becoming, even if she is very different from what she imagined. This transition is not simple. It requires awareness, humility, and listening. But when it happens, the bond grows stronger, because the daughter feels she no longer has to play a role, and the mother discovers she can love from a lighter, truer, more human place. There is a precious moment in a mother's life when she looks at her daughter and finally sees her, not as a reflection, not as a continuation, but as another woman. At that moment, a new kind of love is born. A love that respects, that lets go, that remains even without control. When love ceases to be a projection, it becomes trust. And that trust is what allows mother and daughter to walk together, no longer bound to each other, but side by side, with freedom, with affection, with mutual admiration. Because in the end, there is no more beautiful way to say, "I love you," than to allow the other to be whole, even if different. Between mother and daughter, there is a deep bond often built with love, sacrifice, devotion, and intense coexistence. It is natural then that the desire to protect, guide, and participate in a daughter's life remains strong even when she is an adult. However, there is a decisive moment in this bond, the moment when the mother needs to allow her daughter to be who she is, even if that means moving away from the model she dreamed of. Freud said that psychological maturation involves symbolic mourning. To grow, one must lose the fantasy of completeness, accept the limits of life, and endure difference. This is true for daughters, but also, and perhaps especially, for mothers. Allowing your daughter to follow her own path, make different choices, and have different values is an exercise in renunciation and mature love. It does not mean giving up, but accepting that she is not an extension of you, that she is a being with a history, desires, anxieties, and trajectories that belong to her. Many mothers feel that they are losing space in their daughter's life when she becomes independent. When she gets married, moves out, has children, makes decisions that are not shared, a void emerges. A silence that seems cold, a distance that can seem like ingratitude. But in fact, this is a natural movement in the cycle of life. In the Freudian view, separation is what makes true love possible. As long as there is fusion, there is confusion of roles, expectations, and projections. Only when mother and daughter differentiate themselves can they see each other clearly. And it is in this space between them, this necessary interval, that respect is born. When a mother insists on remaining at the center of her adult daughter's life, she may do so out of fear, insecurity, or loneliness. But the effect of this is often a rupture. The daughter feels that her autonomy is at risk and distances herself to preserve her identity. Not out of selfishness, but out of vital necessity. The daughter needs to make mistakes, experience frustration, try new things, and change her mind. She needs to choose freely, even when her choices seem wrong. And the mother who understands this is not being negligent. She is being wise. She is trusting that everything she has taught is somehow alive within her daughter, even if she does not follow in her footsteps. True love is not offended by difference, it welcomes it, and in that welcome it establishes a new way of living together, lighter, more mature, richer in listening than in advice. Many mothers fear that by letting go of control, they will lose their daughter's love. But in practice, the effect is the opposite. A daughter who feels free to be herself returns of her own free will, not out of obligation. She seeks her mother for support, not surveillance. She shares her life rather than just obeying expectations. This new relationship is not based on hierarchy, but on trust. It is no longer about leading, but about walking side by side. It is about recognizing that both are women with different experiences, and that this difference does not have to be a source of conflict. Allowing her daughter to be who she is often requires the mother to face her own fears. The fear of loneliness, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of no longer being needed. But when these fears are named, understood, and no longer projected, Onto her daughter, something changes. The bond ceases to be a tense rope between expectations and frustrations and becomes a strong bond based on mutual respect. A bond that does not bind, but sustains. That does not demand, but welcomes. And that grows stronger, as each one is able to breathe their own air. The mother does not lose ground when she lets go of her daughter. She gains another kind of presence, more subtle, more symbolic, more lasting. She becomes a reference point, a safe haven, a living memory. And that is more valuable than any control. Ultimately, loving your daughter is not about ensuring that she is like you were or like you would like her to be. To truly love is to allow her to become whatever she wants, even when it challenges us, and to remain by her side, not as a guide, but as someone who respects the path she has chosen. This freedom, far from pushing us apart, brings us closer together, because only those who feel free to be who they are can love fully and remain by choice, not by duty. The relationship between mother and daughter is undoubtedly one of the most complex and delicate in human existence. It is a bond made of memories, silences, gestures, expectations, and affections that span time. And often, it is also the space where the past insists on repeating itself, asking to be understood, not ignored. Freud taught us that what remains unconscious tends to return as destiny, and this destiny almost always presents itself in the form of repetition, not only of behaviors, but of stories, pains, patterns, and unfulfilled dreams. When mothers and daughters are unaware of this process, they can become reflections of each other, trapped in a chain of silent loyalties. But understanding how this works is not an accusation, it is an act of freedom. When a mother decides to look at herself, her history, her own pain, she does not just transform herself. She breaks the cycle, she protects, she liberates. She honors all the women who came before her, and all those who will come after her. Similarly, the daughter who recognizes these deep bonds has the opportunity to stop being a mirror and become a subject, to take ownership of her voice, her body, her desires, and still love her mother, not for what she projected, but for who she is. A woman who also sought happiness with the tools she had. There is no perfect script. There is no manual for this journey. But there is a possible meeting point, when mother and daughter decide to no longer demand perfection from each other, but to offer each other a listening ear. When they understand that true love is not based on control, but on trust, and that respecting differences is the greatest form of care. If you've made it this far, you may have already taken the first step, looking at this relationship with greater awareness, and that in itself is transformative. Because when a woman chooses awareness, she becomes the last in a line of women who suffered in silence, and the first in a new generation that learns to love freely. If this reflection touched something inside you, leave a comment telling us about your relationship with your mother or with your daughter. Your story can help other women who are also seeking to understand, heal, and transform. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive more reflections like this one. That way, you won't miss any new content. Take care and see you next time.